Hey, this is Andrew. In the last recording, I gave a brief introduction to this idea that I have for a new meal planning / shopping list application, sort of a personal database. This idea that I've come up with, and what I wanted to do in this video specifically was just record the process of how I would domain model that specific problem. So I'm going to open up a terminal and I'm going to start a new. To be honest, we don't really have to. We don't have to do this as a new bullet train app, but I'm going to, here we go. Just open up this terminal. We'll just call it Meal Planner for now. I don't have to do it as a bullet train app, but in fact, I'm going to do that as a separate step. So, let's cancel that for now. What I'll do is I'm going to, I'll go into Meal Planner. Oh, well, actually, I've already copied it now. So let's do this. Set name. So this is a bullet train. This is a bullet train feature. So we'll call it meal. How am I supposed to do that? Bin set name. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to open this app. And then what I'll probably do is just I'm going to do a new file. And I'll call it domain model.md. All right, so I've got the editor right here. And then I have domain model.md. And we'll do our work here. All right, so at a really high level, let's just break down what the domain model is going to be for this application. So again, the idea is that you can import your favorite recipes, and that those recipes can be used as components of a weekly meal schedule. So let's start. I'm not going to touch on the meal schedule so much yet. I want to focus on the features around the recipes themselves. But in anticipation of the actually, you know what? We can do this. No, you know what? I don't want to do it because I think it's a little bit complicated. The sort of table structure of the meal plan itself, where there's like a meal on Monday morning and a meal on Monday afternoon and a meal on that's an interesting problem to solve, but I think it is not as introductory as some of the other modeling that we're going to be doing around meals. So here's where we're going to start. We'll skip the meal plan itself, and instead we'll start with a meal. Now, a meal isn't a recipe. There could be multiple dishes that are part of a meal. So we want to keep that in mind. So we'll have a meal, and the meal, so Rails generate model meal, and a meal has a name, and that's it. We'll start with that. And because we're doing this in bullet train and we want there to be sort of like an ability for a family to work together on their meal plan and stuff like that, the functionality in bullet train is team. So we'll just go team references. So everything is a child of team unless it's a child of something else, which is a child of team. So we'll say that we have a meal model, and meal has many. In fact, we can do it like this. I think this will actually work. Although, you know what, we don't need to write this code because it'll get auto-generated by this. So we'll just say meal has many recipes, and then in this document, I haven't done this before, but in this document, I'm going to keep the hierarchy because it's very hierarchical. I'm going to keep the hierarchy via indentation. So a meal has many recipes, and a recipe has many... Does a recipe have many ingredients? It does. But here's the interesting thing. It doesn't just have many ingredients, but you have to think about the fact that an ingredient can belong to many different recipes. And so this is actually a many-to-many relationship, and it's a special many-to-many relationship because each recipe doesn't have the same quantity of a given ingredient. And that's going to be important when it comes time to generate the shopping list. We'll need to know how much of an ingredient is going to be required for a particular recipe. And more than that, we need to be able to multiply that depending on the portion size that the recipe is made for. So actually, that's a really interesting thing. Let's start with that. A recipe, the attributes of a recipe. So we'll say, I'm going to move this into here. So we have a meal, and that's how we, this is where we're defining our attributes, and this is where we're defining our relationships, and all of this ends up getting copied and pasted later. So for a recipe, the recipe model has a name, and it has a quantity of people that it serves. All right, and then it also has many recipe ingredients. And a recipe ingredient, a recipe ingredient has belongs to a recipe, but also belongs to a ingredient, and has a, how would you describe the quantity of an ingredient? Now, that's going to be an interesting, I'm not really totally sure I have the right answer for that off the top of my head, but I'm going to guess that we'll say it has a quantity. So we'll say recipe ingredient has a name and a quantity. How do I want to do that? What is the right data type for? Is it like decimal? That's funny. I don't even know how to do a decimal column in a Rails generator. I don't think I've ever done it. Like a floating point number or something like that. I'm not sure. Let me... I'm not sure. And then I'll do increment, which is, we'll say, I don't know that that's the right word. Actually, you know what? I probably shouldn't do that. I think that's a method for... So for increment, what I'm thinking is that would be like a tablespoon or a teaspoon or something like that, which should be... We'll call it a measurement. Rails G model measurement, and then we'll call that a name. And this is actually going to be this doesn't even reference a team. And this actually isn't under a meal because a meal has many recipes, but a recipe is not... Yeah, not necessarily. So recipe could potentially belong to many different meals. So what we need is a meal recipe. And a meal recipe would be like Rails generate model, meal recipe. And it would reference the meal. And it would reference the recipe. Okay. So belongs to meal and belongs to Actually, you know what? I should probably make this. Yeah, it would be great if we had syntax highlighting, but I didn't think of that. So the meal recipe belongs to the meal and belongs to the recipe. So that's the many to many relationship between a meal and a recipe. So we'll say that recipe belongs to or has many meal recipes, and it has many meals through meal recipes. Okay, so we got that. Now, as this stuff starts getting more complicated, you start thinking like, oh, there's diagramming, tools like UML and stuff like that people use to kind of represent these things. And you start seeing like, oh man, maybe this would be better represented visually. But for me personally, I don't find that so helpful. And so I guess in this example, I'm just showing you how I do this stuff. But maybe it is more helpful to do those things as sketches on the back of a napkin or whatever, and then translate it into this. But I'm basically doing that in my head on the fly, and that's how I tend to do it. So let's see here. So a meal then has many meal recipes and has many recipes through meal recipes. So that's the many-to-many relationship between these two things. Now, recipe ingredient is actually the same. It's not in a hierarchical sort of thing. Recipe ingredients are exactly the same, except you don't end up really utilizing a has many through relationship because it's never really that helpful, I think, to know if you're asking like, hey, this recipe, tell me all the ingredients. You're never going to be like, just give me a list of the name of the ingredients. You'll always want to know what is the quantity and the measurement. So we got to update that. So this is measurement references, and quantity is let me I'm going to look this up real quick. So Rails generator floating point or decimal. Oh, float. Ah, man, how do you forget something like that? Okay, so we use float. Rails generate model recipe ingredient name string. The quantity should be a float, which means that we can say like a quarter teaspoon would be like that value. Measurement references. Now, recipe ingredient. So we have the recipe. The ingredient needs to, whoops. The ingredient has a name. And I'll get to this. So for certain ingredients, there will be an ability to specify where you want to pick up certain ingredients. And so, for example, my wife only likes to get her vegetables from, Trader Joe's or like Whole Foods or something like that. That may not actually be true, but she likes getting them at certain things at particular places, or she knows where they need to be got. Because she'll know certain stores don't have certain things. So what we want to be able to do is specify that an ingredient can only comes from a particular store. So we're going to want to have a store model, And the store has a name. And the ingredient has a store that it references, and I think we say optional. I think that's the syntax. Let me double check that. Well, I can't remember. I feel like there is some syntax for this on the This is going to be so old it won't even be helpful. Yeah, so apparently we have to do it manually. So when we do belongs to store optional true, so we'll have to add that. Belongs to store optional true. And then I'm also going to say that there is a category of like ingredient category. Ingredient category. So Rails generate model ingredient category. And that would be something like vegetable or produce or fruit. And we'll say, and you have the option of, oh, sorry. You'll have the option of specifying the store that you get an entire category of ingredients in. So we'll say that has a ingredient category references, but that's also optional. You know, every ingredient doesn't have to belong to a ingredient category. And ingredient categories can be we can specify that at a team level, I think. So that'll be like a per family. They can specify their ingredient categories, give them more flexibility. I think that's a cool idea. So the store and the stores are definitely at a team level. So that's like a family level. So ingredient categories, ingredients belong to family. And what else? Recipe ingredient. Let's see if we got anything else here. So the idea is that you have a system definition of measurements. So the entire service will define, you know, every type of measurement that can be, you know, described in like a pinch of salt or a tablespoon of whatever. The meal, each family, which we call team, each family can define a meal from, and a meal has many recipes through the meal recipe relationship. So a recipe has can belong to many meals, but is made up of many ingredients. Now, the recipe also, we want to keep track of when a user is adding a recipe to the system, it's going to be a URL. They're not going to like paste all the text in. They could, They can do that if they want to add the recipe as its own description, if it's like a personal recipe or whatever. But generally, a lot of this stuff is coming off the internet, like allrecipes.com, 5-star, whatever. So they can just punch in the URL, and that we're not copying the recipe or anything like that. There you go. So then you have the description, which they can use to supply their own version of the recipe. And then this is used for the math on meal planning. So they'll be able to specify, for example, like on a given week when it's generating the recipe, they can be like, oh, we're having the so-and-sos over on Thursday. Let's make the meal for 8 instead of 4. And then it'll do the recipe math for them automatically. So a recipe has many, it belongs to many meals. So, yep, that makes sense. And a meal, to be clear, a meal is not for a given day. It is a predefined, like that thing that we did last Thursday. Let's do it again this Thursday. It's the meal plan will be an individual instance of a meal on a given day. So every recipe is made up of, has many ingredients, but in each recipe, it's going to have a particular quantity. And it's going to have in fact, this doesn't have a name. So let's clean that up. In a given recipe, an ingredient will require a certain amount of that ingredient, and that's the quantity. And the measurement of that quantity is a reference to this global sort of configuration for the entire app that I'll maintain for all families. All right, so an ingredient has a name. It can be picked up at a particular store. You can specify a particular store you want to pick it up at, or you can specify a category for that ingredient, if that's helpful. Because sometimes you want to just say, hey, this entire category of ingredients we want to pick up at Trader Joe's, and so and so we do that by having for our family, this ingredient doesn't have a name. This ingredient gets picked up at this store, and that belongs to the team. It also belongs to the ingredient, and it also belongs to the store. So actually, we can get rid of the team reference, because both of these other resources are scoped by family anyway. So there we go. So an ingredient category is just a connection between I messed that up. You're right. So the ingredient category, that's stupid. Sorry about that. The ingredient category does have a name. That's going to be like vegetables. It is not going to reference a specific ingredient. It has many ingredients, but you can configure a particular store. However, that is optional. All right, and then finally, they have a database of stores that is specific to a given family or team. So it belongs to a team, has a name, and as we specify, we can relate that to either an ingredient or an entire category of ingredients. So that's pretty good. That's the domain model for this application. Now, the last piece of the puzzle that we can work out, now that we have this, I'm going to save this. Let's figure out what the domain model is going to be for a meal plan. So the meal plan is going to have let's say the meal plan is for a date of we'll just say the week of, and we'll make that a date time. and then we will say, I mean, there's two ways of doing this. We could specify the 3 meals. We could specify on this thing like Monday meal, Monday breakfast. Like we could do that. In fact, I'm like half tempted to do that. That would be, wonder if that'll be a pain. Although I could also delegate that to somebody else. Let a developer implement this, and then if they want to refactor it. So I could just say Monday breakfast references, and then I can do, or Monday breakfast ID is probably what I have to do, because it won't be able to figure out the indexing automatically, I think. So Monday breakfast ID, Monday lunch ID, Monday dinner ID. Now, the deal here is that you could also say like meal plan, meal, which would be the relationship between a meal plan and a meal. And you could say, okay, has many, or belongs to meal plan, belongs to meal. And then you could so this is a many-to-many relationship between meal plan and meal. And then you could have date or, yeah, I think there's a date data type, right? Yeah, so we could just say date. In fact, we should do that here too. You could say that it has a date and then a meal. What do you say? 3 meals a day. 3. What would the right word for that be? It would be like a meal of the day references. And so this would be a or actually, you know what we could do? Yeah, you could do that. Meal of the day. So it's like a global thing where there is a meal of the day, name, string, and then there's going to be like on the console we would do meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, each do in fact name, meal of the day, create name. So that would be, you would populate this as, you know, part of your seeds or whatever. So you have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then we can reference that as the meal of the day. So belongs to meal of the day. So for a particular meal of the day, for this meal plan, for this particular meal of the day, on this date, we'll have this meal. And then this is optional because you don't have to include breakfast on Sundays. Because you know what? Everybody eats cereal for breakfast on Sunday. There's no meal. This isn't, you know, we're not like line chefs or anything like that. You can eat cereal. We don't have to have a planned meal. In fact, we do that most days. So that needs to be optional. We're not bitter about it. Just eat cereal. You'll survive. All right, so I think that's that. And then, so for this, maybe we do want to do this. Maybe we actually do want to be somewhat responsible and create a real data structure for this. And so we'll say it has many and this, this isn't really great. Like you shouldn't, because when you have these extra qualifiers for what the meal plan, what the meal is, this could be related to the same meal plan more than once for different days of the week, and that would be fine. And as a result of that, you shouldn't really set this relationship up this way. Because this could be modified and create data in this table without specifying the meal of the day or whatever. Like it's just, you can't jump over this table because there's another qualifying factor. It's not just these two. It's not these two attributes or these two relationships. So I'm not going to do that. And then what you should actually do here, I think the right solution to this is meal plans. You can just say meal plan meals, or actually you could do this, I think, maybe, and then say like read only true or something like that. I don't know what the actual configuration option there is, but what I would do typically is do the meal plan meals map for the meal plan, and then just unique it so that you're only getting each meal plan once. And so that, if you need that, then you can use this to figure out what meal plans was this meal a part of. And you could use that for logic, like, hey, if we had this last week, don't do it again this week. Unless it's cereal for breakfast on Sunday, because that happens every week. All right, so let's see here. I think we're done here. So the last thing that we're wrapping up, let me just see here. So I'm going to say that meal plan meal, normally I put this in the list down here because it should only reference things that have already been defined. So I think that's a pretty, there might be some issues here when I actually go, the proof is in the pudding. So in the next video, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to scaffold this out into a bullet train app. And we'll see what issues we run into. There will probably be some corrections, things that I overlooked. But let's see how this goes. Before I conclude, the other thing that I should mention from a logic perspective is that when you create, so we will have a thing where when you create a meal plan, it's going to be like after create, stub out each meal of each day, and you're going to have a method that does something like this where 7 times do day of week. So for each day of the week, self dot meal plan meals. Oh no, actually we don't have those yet. So we want to, so for each of those, each day of the week, and for each meal of the day, each meal of the day, we want to create a placeholder for where is it? Meal plan meals. We want to create a placeholder where the date is whatever the week of date is, plus whatever day of the week we're currently trying to stub out records for. This is going to be, so for example, day of the week will be like 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this will be week of will be a specific day. So week of will be a specific day, and day of the week will be, some increment so that we can get from, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So this will be like a Monday, and this will be a number that we want to add that number of days to the Monday. And it will start at 0. So Monday plus 0 days equals Monday. And then it will go through all the days. So it's going to create, a record on that date. And on that date, we also want to cycle through all of the meals of the day. So we'll say that the meal of the day is whatever the current meal of the day is, which will be an object representing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All right, so for that meal of the day, what else do we need? So it's going to populate meal plan because we are using the relationship on a meal plan. We're using the meal plans has many, of this relationship. So we don't have to specify this. We don't have to specify this, I mean. This one here, the meal is empty by default. But here's the interesting thing. Our logic is probably going to auto-populate that, so we can specify a random meal. Oh, you know what? Now that is interesting. If I want to randomly generate a meal, plan, I'm going to need to know which meals can be for which meals of the day. So I'm not going to implement that right now, but that'll come up. It's going to come up that when we want to stub out or when we want to create this meal of each day, if we want to auto-populate a meal plan for the week, we're going to need to know which ones can go in which things. And so the way that we'll end up solving that is a meal will have a given meal will have probably some attributes that say, can you eat this for dinner, or can you eat this for breakfast, and can you eat this for lunch? And then we'll use that. Now, you could just do that as checkbox attributes, but probably what I'll do is I'll have a meal, meal of the day record, like a has many, like a many to many. And so a meal could be for breakfast or for dinner. That seems kind of weird, but probably actually it would, I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll think about that later. Don't have to do it yet. But anyway, this is how you're going to need to populate this. So when you create a meal plan, after we create it, we want to stub out the meal of each day. So for each day of the week and each meal of the day, we create one of these records. And I think that's all we need to do. Yep. Okay, cool. So let's try this in the next video.